Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today's video is all about a new camera, the brand new Fujifilm X-T50 along with the new XF16-50 f2.8 to 4.8 LMWR lens. So we've got a brand new camera and kit lens to talk about today. Unfortunately, I don't have it to show you. I will have some photos to show you and some videos to share with you. Lots of thoughts to share on this. It's going to be a little bit longer video than I think I originally planned. I have more to say about this camera than I thought I would. So grab a beverage and sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. I will leave time codes in the description below so you can jump to the section that is most interesting to you. Additionally, at the end of the video, I'll have a 2 or 3 minute slideshow of photos from my street photography day with this camera. So let's get some introductions and disclaimers out of the way, some things to know about. First, I was loaned this camera through my relationship, my job at Kenmore Camera by Fujifilm. I had access to it for 3 days, this pre-production version. Day one, I spent doing some street photos in Bellevue. Day two, I did some studio photos and video, some beauty shots and things like that. And then day three was out in Bellevue Botanical Garden doing some video promo stuff for use at Kenmore Camera. So I've had just a little bit of time with this camera, and I do have some thoughts to share. Another couple disclaimers is the photos you're about to see, as I mentioned earlier, were from the pre-production camera. Additionally, all the photos were JPEG only, and all the photos will be starting with one of the new film simulations, the Reala ACE film simulation, with some edits from me in Lightroom as well. So I think that covers the disclaimers. If I need to add one later, I will. Here we go. So first of all, let's talk about some of the new features in the X-T50. First thing I think maybe we talk about is the name. I'm guessing the name, the X-T50, going from the previous camera, which was the X-T30 with the 2 after it, is because it's the 5th generation processor, and I think they're trying to get the names aligned. So this aligns with the X-T5, X-T50. I think those names make sense. So I believe that's why the names. Let's get into the features that you probably care most about. So we'll start with the brand new sensor. So I guess it's actually not a brand new sensor. It's the same sensor that is the 40 megapixel X-Trans 5 in the X-T5 and the X-H2. It does have 7 stops of in-body image stabilization, so that's kind of handy. Additionally, this camera also has, and this is new, a digital teleconverter built in. It's basically a crop. Okay, so I'll show you some photos from that in just a second. So you have 1.4x and 2x digital converter built in, easy to access through the menu. And here is the full size file at 7728 by 5132 pixels. And if you go to 2x, you do get obviously zoomed in from the same position, but we've lost a whole bunch of the pixels. We're at 3888 by 2592. So it's not magic. It's basically a nice, easy to use, built-in crop in camera for those situations where you want to get closer, but you maybe physically can't or don't have the lens to let you get closer. Next, let's talk about some of the video features. We do have some new settings and some different settings than you'll find in the X-H2 and the X-T5, as well as the X106, which I forgot to mention also uses the same processor. So we've got 6.2K at 30p, so that is not quite a full open gate readout, but it's still a 3:2 readout of the sensor, which is nice if you want to be able to have both a 16:9 crop and a 9:16 crop for potentially social media use. You get 4K 60. The slow-mo is limited to 1080p, full HD, but you do get some nice 4.2.2 10-bit video if you're recording out to HDMI. So here's the look at the screen for slow motion in full HD. In my experience of using slow motion. I just did it a couple times. It works really nicely, but because it's cropped pretty significantly and it's, you know, not binning pixels, but it's using not the full sensor, there is some moire possibilities. I noticed some interference patterns in a couple locations. I was doing a bridge that had some fine wires on it, and you could see a little bit of moiring on that. Also, the video I'm going to show here of zooming in on my son's dog sitting on our couch, you'll see a little bit in the fur. You get, at least on my screen, I'm seeing a little bit of moiring there. So it looks really nice, but just be aware of, because of its scaling issues, you might, in certain situations, get a little bit of that issue in your slow motion videos with this sensor. I have no specific information, just kind of educated guesses on why the higher frame rates to get you slow motion is limited to 1080p, the full HD, and that's because the body's so small. I'm guessing heat dissipation is more of an issue in that smaller body, just the physics of that. So by limiting it to lower resolution at your higher frame rates, you generate less heat, I do believe. So that's my guess on that. All right, let's go back to other new features. And the next one is you get built-in Frame I/O support for camera to cloud directly without any attachments. They've added this to the XH2, XT5, XH2S, and I believe the X106 also has this. So basically all the 5th generation sensors and processors now can send photos directly from the camera to frame.io. You need a subscription. It's not part of the Adobe Creative Cloud directly. It's an add-on. At least that's my understanding. I have played with it a little bit on my XH2S. It does work. It's slow. Even on Wi-Fi, it's pretty slow. So in my experience, it's about 3 to 4 minutes to transfer a single RAW file from my XH2S, and it's about a minute or so on a JPEG file. So your mileage may vary. So that's my experience with Frame.io. It's nice to have the option. So on to some new features we have. Again, with the 5th generation sensor and processors, we get AI-assisted autofocus for subject detection with these categories. So we've got animal, bird, auto, motorcycle and bike, airplane and train. And in my experience, briefly with this, although obviously I have more experience with the XH2S, it works as advertised. It works pretty well. Each iteration of firmware where they do some improvements to this gets better. So I believe that'll be the case with this camera as well. One of the new things that I quite like about this camera is the redesign of basically the whole body, especially around the front of the camera. There's a new grip on the front, and it's much easier for me to hold. It's still not super big, but it's not as flat as it was on the X-T30 and X-T32. So also along with that, we have a redesigned rear thumb rest, as well as the Q button. It's a little more prominent. It sticks out, so less likely to accidentally trigger the Q button in its new location. So again, I really like what they've done with the ergonomics here. The whole body itself feels really solid. It's hard to describe, but it feel like a very, very high quality piece of equipment. Overall, the body is less boxy than the X-T30. Here's a look at the two next to each other. You can see the more contoured grip on the top left of the camera as you're looking at it when you're holding it. You'll notice under the X-T50, you got a lot more contour there. You also have a larger and more accessible front control wheel. So that's in a much more friendly to use location than it was on the X-T30 and X-T32. So quite a big improvement. It's quality of life improvements that make a difference in the day-to-day use of your camera. Along here, we can see we have a new color. So we've got this charcoal silver, it's called. So it's in between, it's kind of a medium gray that's in between the black and silver, which have been previous colors and still exist. It's a neat color. I quite like it. It's got just a teeny bit of blue to it. It's a little cooler gray than a warm gray. So it's nice to have 3 color options. I'm glad we have it. It's a really neat looking color. Personally, I'd still probably go with the black just because it's stealthy and that's my preferred camera color. And I've saved the maybe most controversial feature for last, which is the film simulation dial. So previously this was the drive dial, but now it's film simulation. And I wasn't sure how I would feel about it until I turned the dial. And here's a really cool thing that happens. It's a brand new interface for changing film simulations on screen. So you get a large interface wheel here that mimics the control wheel on top, and you get a larger preview of both the name of the simulation you're applying, as well as you get to clearly see the film simulation on screen here. Both when I showed this to Heather, who does our marketing at Kenmore Camera, and my wife Debbie at the garden, when I showed them this, they both went, "Ooh, that's really cool," and they were really excited about the potential of it. So kudos to Fujifilm for this new interface. I hope it translates to other cameras, because I think it is quite a nice thing. Nice little detail. Before we move into the features that carry over from previous generations of this camera, let's talk a little bit about size of this camera, because that's its big selling point. It is the smallest and lightest of the current X series cameras. So that's a pretty powerful thing to say, especially with a 40 megapixel sensor inside of there with in-body image stabilization, plus access to obviously all the X series lenses, plus all the new third-party X series lenses that are coming out. So having it in a small and light body is quite a thing. And you're wondering, because I can't show it to you, how small and light is it? So here's a comparison. It's smaller and lighter than an X-T1. So that's a little bit of a size reference for you. If you want a little more size reference, just for grins and giggles, here it is compared to a Nikon D70 from 2004, which at the time felt like a small camera, but compared to the X-T50 is a monster. It's really, really large. As the owner of an XH2S, which is the current largest and heaviest of the X series cameras, I didn't know how I would feel about the size and weight of this. I thought, oh my gosh, it's going to be feel like a toy. But it doesn't. It is very, very small and light, and it's super easy to carry. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but yeah, I was really impressed with the size and weight. It's the best word I can think of is it's fun. It's nice to have a really tiny camera. And in fact, it is so small and light, let's compare it to the X100VI. So because the X100VI is still so difficult to get, and it's going to be hard to get for, I think, at least another 6 months, if not longer, let's take a look at how they compare to each other. So the X-T50 is actually smaller and a little bit lighter than, quite a bit lighter than the X100VI. The only dimension the X-T50 is larger in is the height, and that's the top where it looks like the viewfinder prism from the old days, but is just for the electronic viewfinder. So what some people are doing, I've noticed in both YouTube and in the camera store, is they're pairing the XF 27mm 2.8, the pancake lens, with a small camera such as the X-T30, or now they can with the X-T50. And even that combo is actually still smaller and lighter than the X100VI. So you can kind of make your own X100VI with an X-T50 and an XF 27 2.8. So just a thought for you if you can't get your hands on an X100VI, because they're hard to get. Next, let's talk about some of the features that carry forward from the previous generations of this camera series. First thing is the battery. We're still using the small 126 batteries, which is probably what you have to do engineering-wise to keep this body this small and this light. As a previous user of the X-T1, X-T2, and X-T3, I have a whole bunch of these. I'm used to it. It's just part of life in using these smaller cameras. So it's an adjustment, it's a compromise, but it's pretty easy to make. Another carry forward feature is one memory card in the battery compartment. So we have an SD card slot in the battery compartment. Additionally, we still have the auto switch, which the first time I was in the camera store and had a demo on X-T30 and couldn't figure out how to get it in manual, I didn't know it had an auto switch. It's one of the few X series cameras that has this, and it's not super obvious if you didn't know it was there, but it continues in the X-T50. Additionally, we still have a pop-up flash, which is kind of nice if you like that sort of light look or just like having the access and flexibility to a flash. And the screen articulation and LCD screen is the same as previous. It's just horizontal tilting. It does not flip vertical as it does on the X-T5. Also, the viewfinder is the same as previous as far as resolution and size, as is the screen resolution and size. Next, let's talk about some of the new features on this new kit zoom lens. Before we talk about this lens, we need to talk about the specifications of this lens. And I think it's a little bit controversial because I think have been spoiled by the 18-55 2.8 to 4.0. At 16-50 f2.8 to 4.8, that's new for us in Fuji land. And if you've ever taken a look at the kit lenses available in Canon and Nikon especially, they're 16-55 or 18-55, 18-50, and their maximum aperture at zoom is often 6.3. So we still have it pretty good in Fuji land, I think. Also, I believe, again, I don't know specifics on this, but I know every lens design is full of compromise for size, weight, optical performance, price. And then in this case, they're designing new lenses to be fully compatible with these 40 megapixel high resolution sensors. So that's part of the equation as well now. And in my brief experience with this lens, it's awesome. It's pretty wonderful. I'll talk a little bit more about specifics on that lens in just a minute, but let's talk a little bit more about the specific new features of this lens. Here we go. So again, as I mentioned, we do support the latest 40 megapixel high resolution sensors. And again, brief experience with this. It works really, really well with the sensors. The minimum focusing distance is quite short, 9.4 inches, about 2.24 meters. You get quite nice magnification with this lens at that distance, so at 50 millimeters. So it's really nice with that. It's a compact lens at 2.8 inches long. It's very light at 240 grams, which is about half a pound. The zoom mechanism is now completely internal, so the lens is going to stay the same size. That's nice and handy as well, and it just keeps the whole thing very tidy and compact, which I think is the main selling point of this camera and lens package, to keep it small and light and discreet. This lens is weather resistant as well, but because, again, all the new generation of camera bodies have in-body image stabilization, this lens does not have optical image stabilization. So that's one thing you give up in this lens from the previous 18 to 55 millimeter. So briefly, again, on my experience using this lens, it's fun, it's nice, it's light. The internal zoom took a little getting used to. It's different. I mean, I'm used to Fujifilm zoom lenses having an element that grows as you zoom, but this one doesn't, and it's really nice. It's handy. Again, it's a way to stay discreet with this lens, and also, I'm assuming, helps with weather resistance as well. Autofocus is fast, accurate, quiet, just like I've come to expect from Fujifilm lenses, so no surprises there. It seems to perform really, really nicely in my experience with this pre-production lens as well. Regarding my one common complaint with Fujifilm lenses is the aperture ring and the varying degrees of resistance and stiffness in that ring. This one felt nice. To me, it's kind of my happy spot of resistance, not too loose, not too tight. And also, there are no numbers on the aperture ring because it's a variable aperture. So there you go on that. So as you know, I don't do photos of brick walls as I'm thinking about evaluating the performance of a lens, but I do like me some sun stars. So it was a sunny day when I was out with the camera, so I went out to make some photos, and I had some opportunities to experiment with sun stars. And they're really quite nice. They're pretty dramatic. Here's I'll show you a sequence of photos with some various apertures. So this lens does render sun stars a little bit as a double bladed kind of sun star. I don't know if that's the right term, but that's what I'll call it. So here's a photo at f20. Here we go at f11. And here's f5.6. So also you'll notice we do have a little bit of flaring going on here in this photo on the left side. I don't mind it myself. I kind of expect it, and am a fan of the J.J. Abrams lens flare look, so it doesn't bother me too much. Here's another photo. Again, depending on the exact angle, aperture, and all those things, will determine how the flaring happens. If it does, and it's more subdued in this photo. You can see a little bit of it on the right-hand side where it against the building, but you know, again, it's not a problem for me. I'm not a perfectionist about this kind of stuff on lenses. Overall, again, really happy with this lens. The whole package of the lens and the camera is so easy to just hold in hand and walk with. Again, I mentioned, this is my day-to-day camera, the X-H2S and the 16-80. It doesn't feel heavy to me because it's my normal. But so when I picked up the X-T50 with the 16-50, I was like, oh, I see why people like this. Because it's a really small and tidy package that feels solid and dependable. And it feels like you can walk around all day with that without getting any kind of tired at all. So it's pretty handy to have that tiny and light package. Another thing about using this day-to-day, that redesigned front grip was really helpful. It's just the X-T30 always felt really flat to me and uncomfortable to hold for any duration of time. This felt really, really nice. And again, using my wife Debbie as an example, when she held the camera, she went, ooh, this is really nice. She comes from using an X-T4, so she's used to a little bit larger camera. She does have a small rig grip on hers. So she really liked the small size and weight, and yet the ability to hold this camera really easily. It felt good to her. One thing that surprised me about using the camera was the shutter sound. It's not loud, but it's much more noticeable than the XH2S or the X-T5. It is more noticeable. It's not loud. I'm not sure if that's just a function of the whole body design. I expected it because of the IBIS to be a little quieter, but it's a little more clunk than not. So there you go with that. In my experience, using the autofocus on this camera performs pretty much the same as the other 5th generation camera from Fujifilm. It's fast, it's pretty accurate, and it's pretty sticky as well. Each generation of firmware seems to improve that, which I'm glad for. I find it in day-to-day use to be very reliable and extremely usable. Apologies if you're hearing lawnmowers. It's mowing day at the condos. So I'll try and finish up before they come back. So we'll see. As I mentioned, battery life's going to be a little bit of an issue potentially, just like it always has been in cameras that use the 126, because it is just such a tiny battery. Again, I got had 2 hours out, about 120 or so photos, couple videos, and my experience was I had about 50% battery life left at the end of that day. So again, pre-production version of the camera, so your mileage may vary on the one that you get starting soon, hopefully. So one more item to discuss in relation to this camera is the $500 elephant in the room. We're going from a $900 on the X-T30 Mark II to $1,400 on US on this camera. So how come? Well, I think there's a couple things in here that make it more expensive, obviously. And the first one is that new sensor. I'm assuming it's a lot more expensive than the 26 megapixel sensor that has been in previous generations of the camera. So R&D costs, making the new IBIS system to fit in this specific body is probably R&D in that as well. So I think that's the major component. Additionally, from my memory of this camera versus the X-T30, it just feels a little nicer. It's hard to quantify that, but it feels nicer, just a little bit more higher end, just a little bit nicer. That's, I think, the reason for the price increase. The X-T30 version 2, from what I understand, will continue in the lineup, so we will still have that $900 camera as an option, an under $1,000 camera. So cameras are going the way, I think, of cars, in that, you know, there's no $10,000 or $15,000 new cars anymore, even $20,000 new cars. If you want a $500 camera, you probably will need to go to a used camera and find a good value there. But that's just, I think, the nature of the camera industry going forward. There are so many amazing features in these cameras now from a quality of life standpoint, amazing autofocus and video features and things like that, that are just expensive to create, manufacture, and maintain. So one person's opinion, but there you go on why that price increase. So let's summarize a little bit. Who's this camera for at that extra price now? And I think there's a couple audiences I can think of really easily for this camera. And the first one is someone like me who does street photography. This is a great camera for street photography with this, especially with the 16 to 50 millimeter, if you like zoom lenses. It is so small and lightweight. It's easy to carry all day. It kind of, as I said, disappears in your hand and disappears when you're using it. So from a street photography perspective, I could see this as being an amazing camera. I think for folks who are maybe looking for a second Fujifilm camera, maybe someone again like me who has an XH2S or one of the larger bodies and just wants something really small, compact, and light for travel, or maybe like an everyday carry kind of thing. Again, combine it with the 27mm f2.8 and you've got kind of a imitation version of the X100 VI. So I think that's who this camera might be for, as far as, you know, a targeted audience and people who would be obvious to think about it. Another reason is it is the smallest and lightest Fujifilm camera. So for people who have that as their priority in getting a new camera, this one checks all those boxes really well. It's a lovely camera. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. It just was fun to use. That's the easiest way I have to describe this camera. It's really fun to use. The image quality is no surprise. It's amazing and awesome. I highly recommend this camera. At least consider it if you're thinking about getting into the Fujifilm system or looking at a second Fujifilm camera. This is one I hope you put on your screen to consider. So to summarize a little bit, I didn't expect to really like this camera as much as I did. The X-T30 I've enjoyed. I mean, it's a neat camera because it's so small and light. But this one is a camera I can envision using. I really like the way it feels. It addresses a lot of the friction points of usability that I felt with the X-T30 series. So it's a camera I can highly recommend. It's just fun. There's something about a camera that's this small and light that just takes away all the, oh, I don't want to carry a camera with today objections and gets rid of them. So I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions about the camera, I'll do what I can to answer them. If you leave a comment down below, I'd be glad to try and answer the question. My understanding is the camera will be released on June 17th. If you want to take a look at it, they should be in camera stores around then. So again, if you're in the Seattle neighborhood, love to see you at Kenmore Camera and help you take a look at this neat new little Fujifilm camera. Coming up next, I have some photos to share with you from my street photography day with this camera and the XF16-50. Additionally, at the end of that, there's two photos not from street. One's a landscape, and the other one is a photo of my son's dog. That photo was made with the X-T50, the one of my son's dog, and the 70-300, so a different lens in that very last photo. Again, a reminder, these photos were made with a pre-production version of the camera and lens, as well as all the photos were photographed with the new Reala Ace film simulation, JPEGs, and then slightly edited to my taste. So I hope you enjoy these photos. Thanks for watching the video. If you have any questions, again, leave them in the comments below. So until we meet again in a future video, I hope you stay safe, stay well, and have fun creating photos, and enjoy these photos.